So it's good to see a diverse audience out there. I will start by explaining that our organization is responsible for sustainable growth in the community and creation of some diversity, because we're pretty much a monoculture around tourism, which we'll get into a bit later. We have 5 cities that are focal points for economic activity in the county. They're in the narrow river drainage surrounded by a combination of state and federal lands. We did institute a hillside ordinance back in the 90s that prevented development on slopes of greater than 25%. And as a result, most of the development in terms of structures has been concentrated in the valley in these 5 particular cities. We have a total population of around 23,000 people. That's actually grown 7% in this most recent year due to influx of people from COVID. We have around 1,500 businesses. A lot of the businesses in the North Valley tend to be tourism focused, whereas as you go further south in the valley, you get into some agricultural and support services, light industrial activities. The point that Lance mentioned about income inequality is really important in our community, or really relevant in our community, because we have, billionaires with 2nd, 3rd, or 4th homes flying private jets, and we have people that are on, SNAP programs and other support programs. So even though we are and seem to be, a very, high-end community, our median household income is relatively low versus the U.S. The uptick of the overall economy is we have around a $2.2 billion GDP, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this next slide. So I mentioned earlier that we are heavily tourism correlated. That means businesses and services that serve visitors, second homeowners, as well as residents. That comes through the economy mostly by way of sales and wages for people that are hired to serve that business. The Sun Valley Company is the largest employer with around 1,000 full-time employees, but seasonally they increase that to around 1,500 employees. So that business, along with hotels, retail storefronts, and outdoor recreational activities, really drives the economy. We also have a very strong real estate sector. The median home price in Blaine County in the most recent year is around $700,000. So as you can see, that's not something that everybody can afford. Those numbers vary from $1.2 million median in the North Valley to probably around $300,000 in the South Valley. So again, it illustrates kind of one key issue of our economy. The other thing I want to talk about generically is we have a lot of seasonality, and that's really built around outdoor recreation and why people come here. So winters obviously are very busy. People coming to visit the resorts, to snowshoe, to Nordic ski, to snowmobile. And then we have a slack season followed by a peak in summer. Summer is not just recreation, it's also cultural activities, symphonies, book festivals, and things like that. So although the economy is robust and has been this way for a number of years, we obviously have more recently suffered some declines in terms of COVID-19, and we're just rebuilding back from that, but the economy has been recovering relatively quickly. Now, around all of that economic information, I want to talk a little bit about economic decline or losses. So this is a somewhat dated map, but it gives you an idea about natural hazard losses both at a national level and Idaho level and relative to the other counties in Idaho at a Blaine County level. As a remote urban rural interface, we are subject to the usual culprits. I'm waiting for my fade to come up. It doesn't seem to want to work. There we go. Wildfire has obviously been one of the major impacts, and we've had two major wildfires that elicited a national response. Maybe some of you were present and helped save the towns, as we say. But the 2007 Castle Rock fire, the 2013 Beaver Creek fire, and around that there have been numerous smaller blazes, but none have required national attention or remediation. But we get other things. We get ice storms. Snowfall shortages impact the economy. As a result of fires or other things, mudslides on the back end, flooding through the Big Wood River. The catchment basin here is basically the White Clouds, the Sawtooths, the Smokies. All of that water, depending on the melt cycle, comes down through the pipeline in the middle of all these towns. Right now, if you've been following the news, yes, everybody's in drought, but we're in exceptional drought. We were in exceptional drought very early, and we're going to see the impact of that going forward. So I want to come back and focus a little bit more on the two major events that we've seen. So Castle Rock and Beaver Creek. Those fires, I like to compare them. If you look at the map on the right, the hatched area in black was the earlier Castle Rock fire. Burned roughly 50,000 acres. I guess that seems small in light of some of today's activities. But although it threatened a lot of homes, we had 0 structures burned, but we had a large firefighting crew that came in from around the country. We've estimated the suppression costs at around $25 million for that fire. Beaver Creek, which is the hatched blue area, kind of burnt around the Castle Rock area. And although it was a much larger area, it caused a little bit less economic damage because it was kept away from the urban areas. So these are, kind of our most recent major things. I like to look at it in the context of relative economic impact. And, apart from the Great Recession, these two fires were the biggest events that we've had in this community. Flooding, does have some economic impacts, but it's really mostly along homes in the floodplain area. And then things like drought and mudslides are lesser economic impacts. We'll also look at it, dig into the economics a little bit. If you take a look at, these are Beaver Creek fire examples. If you take a look at the economic impacts by each of the cities, you can see that the bulk of the damage really was to Ketchum's economy. And that is really around loss in sales, closures, things of that nature. Hailey, as the next largest city, had the next largest impacts. And Sun Valley doesn't have a lot of retail economic activity in a traditional sense, so the impacts were lesser there. So it's instructive to realize that you not only have losses in terms of the community, but you also have ups and downs in terms of the actual costs of fire suppression. Another way to look at it is a lot of our losses are driven by visitors. So if we looked at summer of 13 when the Beaver Creek fire occurred, the blue bar, you can see that we had substantially fewer visitors for the summer period. versus 2014 when things stabilized. What we're seeing now is, in spite of the fact that we don't have fires, we are seeing people reacting to smoke. So I probably should have had smoke season as an economic impact earlier, but we are seeing that, when wildfire smoke from Oregon or Washington or California come into the area, sock in the area, we also see a decline in visitor count. So that, that has people canceling trips, that has people deciding to come and spend less time, and that has a knock-on effect throughout the whole of our economy. One of the outcomes of a fire, obviously, is what happens when you get into the winter or the rainy season. And all of these fires have created mudslide hazards. This is an example up Deer Creek, of unconsolidated flow coming down the hillsides that have been denuded with the sage and all the grasses burned off. This has cropped up throughout the whole region. And as a result, I think maybe more of the post-fire damages than the actual fire itself. What we have tried to do is build these coalitions. Now, in earlier fires, it'd be the normal suspects. It would be, the Forest Service entities. There would be some local entities like the Wood River Bike Coalition or the Trails Coalition or the Blaine County Rec District. They would get together and they would, try to work on some specific projects. But as a result of the Beaver Creek fire and the extensive damage, we decided to take a slightly different approach and to build a larger community collaborative. So we formed something called the 5B Restoration Coalition. This brought in more organizations and more assets to help rectify the Beaver Creek disaster. It also was focused at the same time on building resilience against future wildfires. The coalition in its inception probably had about 30 to 40 members. It generated a couple $100,000 in funding, and it worked on a series of discrete projects, including repair and restoration, road and trail relocations, as well as things like prevention of cheatgrass invasion and things of that nature. The coalition itself was a cluster of 10 or 12 different organizations coming together. Some of them not-for-profit, some of them for-profit, some of them government. And in the first couple of years after the Beaver Creek fire, this coalition probably met, I would say once a month in the early stages, and then started going to once a quarter towards the end. But it was a very serious commitment of time and resources. There's a lot of people around that table. They would come in and spend 2 or 3 hours. We were fortunate enough to have the National Forest Foundation act as our convener, and I think that's a very important lesson, is convener, somebody who can keep the wheels moving ahead is very important. We also had individuals, donors, individual members of the community who feel very strongly about forest health and preventing things like this in the future. And many of those individuals or donors contributed not insignificant funds to some of the projects that that the 5B Restoration Coalition decided to proceed with. I think at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Lance and let him continue with a broader picture of some of the evolution, if I can call it that, coming out of the 5B Restoration Coalition. As we've been through these cycles of typical community collaboration and response to 5B restoration, to the collaboration with Lance's organization, and then moving forward this new forest health project. One of the critical things to figure out is, what's the economic risk, or what's the economic damage if you're dealing with a past event. Nothing like understanding a dollars and cents costs gets people's attention better. So we always strive to do, organizations like mine will do an input-output study looking at direct, indirect, and tertiary effects. We will often work with some of the colleges in Idaho. The U of I Land Institute has a specific group that looks at environmental impact assessments. So again, there's ways you can partner to kind of come up with a holistic view of the community loss. And you have to think pretty creatively in some of these analyses. It's not just, how much was it spent on suppression and how many sales did you lose. It's, what's the reduction in value in fishing, or what's the potential improvement in value in improved gladed skiing and bringing more visitors here. Second point is, again, engaging a full spectrum of partners. In a community like ours, where we have 134 not-for-profits, and probably 20 of them engaged in, I'll use the word sustainability, resilience, economic, environmental issues, it's important that you are talking with them and building those bridges. Some of the projects, I think the 5B Restoration Coalition was so successful because they identified 15 to 20 really specific projects. And they basically went out and got collaborative funding to make those happen. And at the end of the projects, they could put up a sign or take a tour group out and show them, how it works. Doing it in the background is not the only thing you need to do. You need a little PR. You need a little bit of sharing of the success stories, because success builds on success. And these kinds of things, and brings more money, and maybe let you do some additional stuff. Lance mentioned the framework for disaster response. What was nice is that the disasters, the natural hazards we've had from the last 15, 20 years have enabled us to react very quickly to the next disaster. So, for instance, pulling together the community around response to COVID, starting in March. Last year, we were one of the first communities in the U.S. had the highest per capita infection rate. We were able to work with our government officials, state officials, and really respond quickly. And we can use that same framework, for, God forbid, the next natural disaster. There's also, we go on the second block of bullets, some things that are practical that you may not think about in terms of what these projects have done. Yes, they've made safer, more durable walking paths or trails. Yes, they've rerouted roads that will last longer and be more durable. Maybe they were following an original mining road put in, in the 1880s. The opportunity to take a disaster and to create a more resilient transport network is actually pretty interesting. Some of the work that's being done on the canopy studies and the outcomes of that, as Lance said, it's going to vary from city to city. One of the objectives, I think, of the city of Sun Valley is there's been so many plantings in the city right away, which is generally 60-foot off centers from the roads, that those trees are shading and causing ice buildup, and as a result, car accidents. The trees in those areas are having root infiltration into public water systems. So there's a lot of negative consequences about green canopy too close to the roads, and the city of Sun Valley views this as an opportunity, I think, to understand what degree of infringement there is. We certainly, as a community, the resort side of the community, has changed radically over the last 20 years. And you can look at pictures of, the 1960s and see open sagebrush, and take the same picture, in Elkhorn today, and all you see is trees. The second homeowners value trees. It creates shade. It creates privacy. It creates elements of beauty. But there's a downside to that. When a tree that was planted 20 years ago is now at 60 feet, and your view of Baldy is blocked. Trees also are impacting water use. We have a lot of second homes here where people are here 2-3 months of the year, and they want that green lawn. So, that you've got water meters that are running, and yes, they're paying for irrigation, but irrigation water costs are relatively low. So there's a lot of excess water, and when we get into a situation like this summer with exceptional drought, and our downstream water holders are making their water calls, you're looking at shutting off some of the systems and reducing irrigation across the board. The impact from a government or a regulatory standpoint is that building codes, we continue to change our building codes, and also our local land use ordinances in terms of the types of plantings you can make, how many, the area that's allowed to be landscaped, the types of vegetation that are allowed or disallowed. This also flows through not just at a city level or a county level, but also down to the individual homeowners associations. So it's a very complex web up here when you look at, taking the knowledge that you learn from optimizing a urban canopy and trying to do things in a sense that provides some resilience for the community in terms of water and urban wildfire interface. You get a lot of citizens involved. So the engagement of the community, I think, is a really important thing as cities have that discussion about how to do things better, how to create a more resilient community. So that's a lot of words, and I'll shut up on that note. But Lance, anything you want to add? Fire away.